Cousin for their generosity in helping us as a church. And you all know that generosity is one of our values as a church. So this series that we're beginning today is all about that. And so this morning I want to start a series, and I'm trying to decide if I wanted to go 3 or 4 weeks. You know how I am about that. I just kind of roll with it until I feel like, okay, I'm done talking about that. But this series we're going to call how to be a hero. Now hang in there, and I'm going to explain to you why that's the title of this series, especially as we're approaching what is for many of us known as Big Give. And so if you've been around Tri-Cities Church for a while, you know that every year in November we raise a gigantic offering, and then we give it all away to mission, something that contributes to outside of our church. And so we're heading towards Big Give. We want you to get ready. This year, the goal is, because we understand the economic times that we're in, we set a goal for 15,000, but I'm believing we will raise more than that, but that's our goal this year. And so Big Give is it the 13th of November? 13th of November. So make sure that you are preparing your heart and mind. And this series is going to allow us to focus on what generosity does. Now, before I do that, I just want to give you a quick update. What's going on with me? Many of you know that I finished the first phase. For those of you who don't know, I'm in my second battle with cancer in 2 years. And so I have finished the first phase of this treatment. I was able to ring the bell and everybody celebrated. And it was good to do that, but I do want you to know how things are going and what's next. And so what the doctors like to do is give me about 4 weeks to heal from the radiation treatment and the chemo pills, so that they can go in and get new scans. And so on November the 8th and the 15th, because I couldn't get them on the same day, we'll go in and get new scans, restage the cancer, and then my surgeon will decide if the tumor responded enough for him to feel comfortable to go in and remove what's left, or if I need to have further treatment, which could probably include infusion chemo. That's where you sit in the chair and they run the chemo through your body. And so right now I'm just trying to heal from that. I was telling people in the back, the treatments are cumulative, so you usually feel okay during the treatment. It's about 2 weeks after when you really start feeling the weight of what was done to your body. And so, you know me, I'm always going to keep it real with you. I am tired. Fatigue has started to set in. I did have a little bit of pain, but the doctors are managing that with medication. So I'm doing okay. I reserve and save all my energy so I can be here with you on Sunday. So I don't do a whole lot during the week. I rest, I read, I prepare to preach so I can conserve my energy. But keep praying for us, and also keep praying for Jamie and Stacy, as he also shared with us last week, him getting a diagnosis of Parkinson's. So Jamie and I, you know, we're good friends and buddies, and so we've been joking about how we're going to be having to help each other's bodies and drag each other along as we do ministry together, but we're still hanging in there. Now, one of the things that I actually tweeted, and this is kind of funny, you know, I thought about in the last 2 years, with all the stuff that's been put in my body, like vaccines, because I had to keep myself safe. And then, you know, chemo, I'm having all these drugs and pills and steroids and radiation. And I thought about it, you know, I'm a little bit disappointed that I haven't become like a super soldier or at least a Hulk, right? Like all this radiation and all that. Because isn't that how the hero stories start? Like there's some medical treatment or some experiment they're doing. I feel like at this point, God, for all the stuff that I've had to go through, the least you could do is give me some superpowers. They put all kinds of stuff in my body. And the truth is that many of us, like if you grew up like I did, we love to watch heroes. There's something about watching that makes us dream of a world that's better. There are people out there who will protect us, who will make the world a better place. And so I thought about, you know, what actually makes someone heroic? And then I found this quote years ago by Ralph Waldo Emerson. He says this: a hero is no braver than an ordinary man, but he is brave 5 minutes longer. which means that we all have the potential to be heroes. It's not that people have special qualities. Like, I know we're excited about I know I am, at least I can speak for myself, about all the hero movies that come out during the fall. Many of us are looking forward to seeing Black Panther, Wakanda Forever. Y'all know what I'm talking about. Don't act like you're not. We've been waiting a long time for that. But the reality is that we don't need a special suit or heart-shaped herb or whatever that thing is that he drinks that makes him go to the ancestral plane. I'm not down with that part, but you know what I'm saying? But one of the things that I've noticed, and we'll see this in the text that I'm going to read this morning, is that oftentimes if you look at the stories of heroes, especially the ones that we admire, whether it's Superman or Batman or Black Panther or any of the superheroes that you grew up listening to, if you watch the stories and read the books and the comics, oftentimes, and maybe you've picked up on this, sometimes it's hard to distinguish between the hero and the villain. Like, they both got powers, they both want to control things, they both want the world to be shaped in a certain way, and the reality is that, let's be honest, the tough thing about heroes is that we don't often know what's the line. Like, how do we know who's right and who's wrong? How do we know who's a hero and who's a villain? And in reality, if we could talk about just some of our maybe realistic heroes, we've learned, especially in the church, we learned this in politics, we learned this in business, that some of the people that we've looked up to over the years as heroes have turned out to be extremely flawed. Yeah, we've seen that, whether you turn on the news and some of the people that we looked up to. This person, when they get in office, they're going to change things for the better. Or this person, when they stand up to preach, they're going to change things for the better. Or this person in business, they're doing a great job. And then over the years, especially as social media has become a part of our ethos, we've started to learn that some of the people who we thought were heroes have turned out to be extremely flawed. And this is what Isaiah is talking about in the text that we're reading this morning, Isaiah chapter 32. I just want to read verses 5 through 8. Isaiah says this: "In that day, ungodly fools will not be heroes, and scoundrels will not be respected. For fools speak foolishness and make evil plans. They practice ungodliness and spread false teachings about the Lord. They deprive the hungry of food and give no water to the thirsty. The smooth tricks of the scoundrels are evil. They plot crooked schemes. They lie to convict the poor, even when the cause of the poor is just." But generous people, you see the contradiction, see the paradox? He says that those who are ungodly fools used to be considered heroes. Those are the people that we used to look up to, but now we're learning that they're flawed. And then he says, on the other hand, but generous people plan to do what is generous, and they stand firm in their generosity. Isaiah is painting a picture for Israel about what the future of their nation might look like. They were waiting on a righteous and just king. Some scholars would say that this is a type and form and a shadow of Jesus to come, that will be one day a righteous king, someone who's not scandalous, someone who's not a scoundrel, someone who we could really look up to really be a true hero. But in these days, Isaiah is dealing with the issue that there are many people in their country, in their society, in their culture, in their politics, and dare I say even in their churches and temples, who position themselves to be heroes only for the people to find out they were really scoundrels. Y'all don't know anything about that as we approach an election, midterm election. You don't know anything about people who position themselves and have commercials and tell them that they're going to be the ones who save our society. And if you vote for me, if you back me, if you support me, if you donate to me, then I'll be the one who will save our society. You don't know anything about that because we watched it over the years. I don't care what your political affiliation is. Everyone tells us what they're going to do when we give them the power and the control. And then somehow over the course of their term, we begin to find out that you're not as heroic as you position yourself to be. And Isaiah is saying to the nation of Israel that there's going to come a day where ungodly fools, his word, not mine, ungodly fools will not be heroes. It's almost as though he is saying that there are those in our society who we've looked up to and given them the title of hero, and they didn't deserve it. Yeah, there are people who we looked up to, people who we voted for, people who we donated to, people who we esteemed as men and women who would be the ones who would come in and change the way that society worked, only to find out, Isaiah says, that they're actually not heroes. But I love how he has a juxtaposition, because in the end, in verse 8 of what I just read you, he says, but generous people. So I want you to notice right up front that Isaiah is saying that there are those who position themselves to be heroes, and there's one thing that helps to distinguish between the heroes and the villains, the people who are really heroic and those who are villains. He says that the people who we formerly esteemed as heroes are takers. He says, but generous people are the ones who one day God's going to lift up as the true heroes of our society. The ones who are not takers but givers. I recently read a book by Caitlin Beatty called Celebrities for Jesus. And she is rightfully so critiquing the celebrity culture in the Western church, where we have exalted men and women, and they might be great people, but somehow we've turned them into the heroes of the faith, and now we have celebrity pastors and celebrity preachers. And one of the things that she does in the book that I love is that she distinguishes between fame and celebrity. Fame is when you're known because of something you did. Celebrity is because you're known for being known. People just know you, therefore there must be something innately good about you just because you have 1 million followers on TikTok and Instagram, and you have cool things popping on your social media. And celebrities are known just for being known, while people with fame are known because they've contributed something. One of the things that I love that she says, that I think you can even see in what Isaiah is saying to the people of Israel, is that she says in her book, one of the problems with celebrity culture in the church is that we have lifted up men and women to be heroic, to be celebrities, and given them an enormous amount of social power without proximity. In other words, we've given them a platform, we've given them social power, and it's without accountability. So we have celebrities who we know, and they're known for being known, but nobody really knows them. They're detached, they're not connected, they're unaccountable, even though they may say that I have a board, or I have this, or I have that. They really are people who are lone rangers who we celebrate as being celebrities in the church. And maybe this is what Isaiah is talking about, that there are those who are in their society and in their culture, and the priests that were serving, who set themselves up to be heroes. But if you listen to what Isaiah says, you will see that they have no proximity to the people who they should be serving. Did you catch what he said? He says they practice ungodliness and spread false teachings. Watch this. They deprive the hungry of food and give no water to the thirsty. In other words, they have power, but they lack the proximity to the people who need them to use the power to bring about God's justice. It says, and we've made them heroes. We've made them celebrities. And I look at Isaiah and I think, boy, you know what's going on in 2022. You haven't even been around, but you can see the same thing happening in our culture, in our politics, in our churches, where we have given people an enormous amount of power and respect without holding them accountable to bring about the justice that God had given them the power to do. So she says, and I agree, that part of the problem is that there's social power without proximity. They're known for being known, but not for anything else. People in power have strained social connections with the people they're supposed to serve. This is what Isaiah is talking about, that those were considered heroes, but the generous people. In other words, it's almost that, as Isaiah is saying, that if you want to know that line between what makes somebody a hero and what makes them a villain. If you're having trouble figuring it out, I watch movies all the time, and I watch the heroes, and I'm trying to figure out what makes them so different from the villain. I think Isaiah gives us a good way to distinguish the heroes from the villain, and he also gives us a good pathway for each one of us to be the heroes that God needs in the world. He says, here's the difference. Villains, in the end, they might have power, prestige, they may be able to do all the same things that the heroes do, but in the end, here's how you know someone's a villain and not a hero. They're a taker. He says, but heroes are people who are generous. They stand firm in their generosity. Isaiah is saying that the criteria for what's considered noble and noteworthy will no longer be celebrity or education or talent and not even wealth. Isaiah says that the tipping point between being a villain and a hero is generosity, which is good now because now I don't need a super serum. I don't need to pray that this radiation that I just took turns me into a Hulk. I can be a hero just by understanding that God has called me to be a giver and not a taker. Isaiah says that heroes plan to be generous. The defining line between villain and hero is that heroes are givers while villains are takers. But here's the hard part, especially because of what we've gone through over the last couple of years. It's hard not to be a taker, especially when the world teaches us to take. Maybe that's why we have a celebrity culture of people who, most of them, I'm not going to indict all of them, but most of them we are finding out are more taker than giver. And maybe that's because, especially in the last 2.5 years, the world has taught us to be takers. Come on, don't look at me like that. When the pandemic first hit, their first thought was, I need to buy all the toilet paper in the grocery store. Don't look at that. You know you're guilty. Just look straight ahead. Nobody gonna know. Nobody gonna know it was you. Because the world has taught us to believe, watch me, that there's only so much to go around. In order for you to make sure that you're okay, you got to transition to being a person who doesn't mind being a taker. So it's hard not to be a taker because the world teaches us that. And it's especially hard, watch me, when it also feels like things have been taken from you. Over the last couple of years, many of us have had that happen, things to no fault of your own. It's not because of your decisions. This is how the world works, that there were things that you were looking forward to. There were plans that you had. There may even be people that you knew 3 years ago that have been taken from you because of a virus. And it's hard. Can I just be honest with you? Look, I get it, Isaiah. We're supposed to be generous, but it's hard to be a giver when the world teaches you to be a taker and when I live in a world that's taken so much from me. How, God, do I learn to be generous when it seems like things are always being snatched from my grasp, my hopes, my dreams, my plans? Everything that I thought I would be by this time this year has been snatched from me. And you're telling me to be generous? No, I need to, come on now, you know what I'm talking about. I need to get mine. But can I just tell you this? Most people don't decide to be villains. They just never decide to be generous. Like, you don't wake up deciding that you're going to be a person who Isaiah would describe as being a villain. I don't wake up doing and acting and behaving and thinking in ways that describe what Isaiah says is a villain. And the issue is not that we wake up with ill intent to say, today I'm going to conquer the world. Today I'm going to take over. Today I'm going to be the worst version of myself. Many of us don't wake up with that, but you know what we don't do? We don't wake up every day deciding that no matter how much the world has taught me to be a taker, and no matter how much has been taken from me, I will decide to be generous. You don't wake up, and I don't wake up deciding to be a villain. I just don't wake up deciding to be generous. because we want to get things out of life. But can I just tell you this? Getting the most out of life doesn't start with getting. It starts with giving. If you want to get the most out of your life, the most out of your plans, the most out of your relationship, the most even out of your finances, the most out of what God has blessed you with, because let's be honest, most of us in here, we want to get the most out of life. But can I just tell you, getting the most out of life doesn't start with getting at all. If you want to get the most out of life, be a giver. Isaiah says that those people who we used to think were the heroes, they're starting to be exposed as takers. But it's the generous that God's going to lift up to be the ones who can be looked up to, because they don't spend their entire life taking. They are dedicated to being generous. I'm going to say this one more time. Getting the most out of life doesn't start with getting. It starts with giving. Now, I told you this is a series, but this sermon, because many of you now, I feel the air just getting sucked out of the room because, he's going to talk about money. But this sermon in particular, we'll get there in this series. But this sermon in particular isn't about giving your time or your talent or your treasure, and you should give those things. We all know every preacher uses that alliteration to talk about what it means to be generous, but that's not what this sermon is about this morning. Because I've discovered that heroes aren't born when they discover they have powers. They're born when they discover they have a purpose. So this sermon is about the connection between generosity and trust. Now, you remember me saying this a couple weeks ago in our Unshakable series, that trust is a radical act of generosity. Because for many of us, let's be honest, the thing that is most valuable to you isn't your stuff. I told the team in the back, the reason why I'm not starting with money today is because, I'll just be honest, if you've been a part of Tri-Cities Church for any length of time, you know this to be true. We don't have a problem giving away money. Prior to the pandemic, in just 3 or 4 weeks, we raised $32,000 for Big Give and gave it all away. Did you know that that is 10% of our annual budget in one offering? Not counting the 10% that we give away every month. The 10% that you give, we give 10% of your 10%. Because we're not going to ask you to do something that we're not doing as a church. So that's not counting what we give away every month. That also means that if you add what we've given away to what we give away every month, we probably give somewhere between 20 to 22% of what we bring in as a church away. So for me, the issue for us as a church, let's be honest, it's not the money. Because every year we stand up here and say, Big Give, here are the people that we're giving to, and you show up monetarily. I'm not concerned about that. Our goal is $15,000, we'll raise it. I'm confident of that. One of the things that drew me to Tri-Cities Church was the generosity of a church of around 100 people who could raise in 3 or 4 Sundays $32,000 and give it all away. None of it was for us. So we don't have a problem giving away money. But there are some things I want us to consider when it comes to generosity that we need to be more generous with. Because trust is a radical act of generosity. But trust is also believing in the principles of generosity, that giving transforms hearts and lives and communities. This is what Isaiah is talking about, that we are waiting on a hero. We're waiting on a righteous king, a righteous judge. Again, many scholars say this is a type and shadow and form of Jesus who is to come, that someone will finally sit on the throne who will govern things not from a position trying to get, but from a position of being a generous giver. This is why Isaiah is critiquing the celebrities and heroes of their day, because everyone that they looked up to failed them because they were takers instead of givers. And poor people were more poor than they were when they took over. I know you don't know anything about that, but come on, let's be honest. I don't want to get too political, but sometimes we look out and we look at the things that should be done to help those who are disadvantaged, and it seems like the people who are in positions of power who can actually do something end up taking, I'm not going to throw any shade, but there are even celebrity retired football players who raise money under the guise, okay, I'm not going to go, I'm sorry, I'm not going to go there, taking money from the poorest people in their state. When all you had to do was write a check out of your own bank account and you could have taken care of the whole thing. These are the people that Isaiah is talking about, that we have looked up to people as heroes because they can sing and dance and throw a ball and shoot a basketball and preach, only to find out that the real line between a hero and a villain is not talent. The real line is whether or not they're a taker. Isaiah says, there's going to come a day where the people who are generous are going to be the ones who God calls the heroes. So, thank you. So I want to just give you a couple of things because, again, money, not really the issue. As a matter of fact, there is a study that I read that talks about how generosity actually builds trust. So I don't want, we'll get to your time and your talent and your treasure. We'll get to how much money we need to raise. But to be honest with you, I can proudly say as your pastor, our church really doesn't have a problem with giving away money. There are some things that I think that the last couple of years has taken from us that has made us more susceptible to being takers than givers. As a matter of fact, we learned this even with God. You remember this, Jesus himself said this. Most famous verse that we know, for God so loved the world that he did what? He gave. The ultimate expression of love is to be generous. And this study that I read says, it's called How Generosity Builds Trust. And it talked about how around the globe, levels of trust are down. And fortunately, it says that ethical leaders can take specific actions to signal trustworthiness. So can I say something that is fairly obvious, but it needs to be said anyway? The world, especially through this pandemic, has lost, if they did have any trust for the church, they've lost almost all of it. They don't trust us. So today's sermon is not just about money, it's about the connection between generosity and trust, not just their trust of us, but also how we understand that our trust in God is also an act of generosity. The research shows that when it comes to building trust during a first impression, the main thing that you can do to build trust is to be generous. Have you ever thought about that? That if you want someone to know your heart and if you want someone to trust you, if we want the world to trust us, the number one thing that the research shows that gets people to trust you is generosity. I think Jesus helped us to understand this thousands of years ago, the connection between generosity and trust, when he says this in Matthew 6, verses 19 through 21. It's not on the screen. He says, don't store up treasures here on earth where moths eat them and rust destroys them and where thieves break in and steal. Store your treasures in heaven where moths and rust cannot destroy and thieves do not break in and steal. And then he says something that transformed my life years ago when I finally got it. He says, wherever your treasure is, there the desires of your heart will also be. In other words, Jesus says there is a connection between what you value and your heart. I like to say it like this: heart follows treasure. I tell people I don't have the superpower like Professor X. I can't read minds, but I can read hearts. You want to know how I can read your heart? Because I see what you give to. Jesus says there's a connection between where you place the things that are valuable to you and your heart. This is why I told you that trust is a radical act of generosity. Because if trust is the thing that I value the most and I'm willing to give it over to God, guess what follows my trust? My heart. Trust. Whether we're trying to get the world to trust us, to trust God, or if you need to find a way to strengthen your own trust in God, here's what the research shows. You build trust by being generous. So there's three things I want us to worry about giving. We'll get to the money because, to be honest with you, I said this before, that's not my issue. I'm fairly confident we'll raise the money and we'll tell you who is going to, and we'll do what we always do. But many of us have been living in a world that has taught us to be takers, and so much has been taken from us, and we are fighting the fine line between being a villain and a hero. So here's where I want us to start before we even get to the money. You ready? Here's what I want you to give if you want to be the hero that God is calling you to be. Number one, give it to God. What's it? You know what it is. Whatever your it is that you've been holding on to, that you've been hoarding, that you have been stingy with, the thing that you don't think you want God to have. And some of us, let's be honest, we're takers because we bring our stuff to the altar and then we take it back. And if you want to be the hero that God is calling you to be, here's the first thing I want you to give before you even write a check. You what? You don't want to know what you need to first give? Give it to God. I'm not going to get in your business. That's between you and God. You know what your it is. It is that thing that you've been stingily holding on to or taking back that you just won't let God deal with. And many of us have not realized that the reason why we haven't given it to God is because giving it to God is really an act of generosity. God, here is my trust. The thing that I most hold valuable in my life is my ability to completely surrender my life to someone else who will guide me and direct me. And some of us, let's be honest, self included, we're too stingy to do that. I'd rather keep this issue in my back pocket so I can deal with it. We got to give it to God. You know what it is? Your future, your dreams, your frustrations, your fears. That thing that you would not readily give God. See, you will readily give God a check. I know that about you. That's what's great about our church. But what about it? What about that thing that you've been wrestling with for the last 2, 3, 4 years? Maybe it's a frustration. Maybe it's forgiveness. Maybe it's someone that you haven't made it right with yet, and you're still trying to punish them for how they sinned against you, and you won't give it to God. Can I just give you some clarification? You can never get payment for sin for somebody who sinned against you because they're not qualified to pay for their sins. And the more you hold on to it, the more you're stingy with your forgiveness, the more that payment is going to keep coming back to your account, insufficient funds, because they're not required to pay for what they did to you. Jesus paid for what they did to you. Give it to him. You want to be a hero? We'll get to the money. But some of us have some stuff that we're not giving God. And it's because we're not being generous in that area. God, you know what? I got some baggage that I've been dragging around that I want to give to you. I want to generously and faithfully surrender and submit all of this baggage to you so that I don't have to be the one trying to carry it around and be stingy with it. Here's what the study said. There's just a few benefits of trust that will help you succeed. That trust and generosity, watch this, it makes relationships resilient. And it allows us to navigate change smoothly. This is why it's been so difficult when me and God have not been getting along through all the changes that have happened the last couple of years, because I haven't been generous in giving him my trust. And trust and generosity helps to smooth the relationship out so that you can navigate the changes of life more smoothly. Think about this. What is one of the main reasons why I keep struggling and how things have changed? And I know it, trust me, the world has taught you to be a taker, and the world has taken so much stuff from you, but what if the real reason why I struggle is because I just refuse to give it to him? The study also goes on to say that trust and generosity also allows us to act even when we have incomplete information. I just said a whole mouthful right there. Because some of us, we need God to tell us the entire plan before we surrender. But did you know that generosity is a principle that says, I'm willing to give myself over to this thing? Remember what I said about faith, that faith is ultimate concern. You remember that? We talked about that. And that whatever you place as your ultimate concern at some point has a right to ask something from you. It has a right to demand your complete allegiance. And here's where we mess up. We think that we can give our hearts to Jesus and then not expect him to expect our total allegiance. I want it all, he says. Because generosity allows us to act even when we have incomplete information. In other words, when I'm generous with giving God my heart and my trust and my submission and laying down my will, it helps me to understand that I don't need to know the entire plan. So number one, give it to God. You know what it is. I didn't come to get in your business today. Some of us, you're ready to write a check, but you haven't given God that thing. And before we get to big give, I don't want you to write one check or give one dime until you give God what he really wants. Your heart. Number two, you're going to be the hero that God calls us to be. Don't just give it to God, give it a chance to work. Isaiah says that the generous or the heroes plan to be generous. It is a way of life. It is a perpetual generosity where I'm constantly giving it over to God. Here's the thing that we're not so generous with. You ready? Patience. God, I prayed 10 minutes ago. Where is my blessing? But what if we plan to be as generous with our patience with God as he is with us? Giving God the time and the timing that works for his will and his plan in the same way that the text says that God is so patient that he doesn't want anybody not to be saved. He's been holding on, waiting on some of us to get it together and say, okay, God, finally I give up. I surrender. But what if being generous means also being the type of person who is generous with our patience with God? Some of us, we give up before God has a chance to work it out. Isaiah says that the heroes plan to be generous. It is a part of their life. You're not generous with your patience on accident. It has to be a plan. It has to be intentional. God, I'm going to wait on you. I'm going to be generous with my time and my patience and my willingness to continue to serve you even though I haven't got what I want yet. We saw that happen a lot in the pandemic because the pandemic took so much from us. In the first place that many of us, and maybe I'm preaching to the choir because you're here, but let's be honest, the first place that many of us took time back from was God. Am I telling the truth? When the pandemic started taking time away from us and we couldn't do the stuff that we wanted to and we had to do things differently, many of us, the first thing that we cut out of our life was church. Because we had no patience. See, heroes in this aspect, when it comes to giving something a chance to work, are trailblazers. But I got to tell you this, you can't blaze a trail if you're going to be afraid of fire. That means you got to be willing to stay the course and be patient with God as he is with you, and be generous with your patience and blaze a trail into a new way of life that you probably never experienced before. And I just got to tell you this again, you're going to face the fire. But people who blaze trails aren't afraid of fire. Give it a chance to work. Don't bail on God because you prayed 3 Sundays ago, or you came to the altar, or you called the pastor, and your marriage is not better by now. Or your money's not better, or the job is not better by now. Give it a chance to work. Generosity is the best way to make your values and motivations clear. When I am generous to God with my patience, it makes my values and my motivation clear. And it signals that I genuinely care about the relationship that I have with him, and not, watch me, just what he can do for me. Even if you can't see the transformation yet, we believe that generosity does transform. Keep giving God the time that he needs to work it out. Here's the last thing, and I'm done. Give it your all. Give it to God, give it a chance to work, and give it your all. Make the most of every opportunity to be a giver, to be generous. Not just to those in need, but to give God all the parts of you that you've been holding on to and hiding. Be brave enough to believe that God honors your generosity. God, have it here. I'm going to give you this. Here's what I've been holding on to. Be brave enough to do that. You know why? Because God gets no glory when you have no guts. Be brave enough to give him everything. To say that I'm going to trust you. Yes, we're going to get to the part where we want you to give money. Don't misunderstand that. We need your money. But I'm more concerned about the other stuff that we haven't given God, because the world has taught us to be takers. So give it your all. I know we're just getting back into the swing of things when it comes to life in church, but can I just encourage you, don't do it halfway. Give God your all. When it comes to serving his church and being present, give it your all. Give God all of both your worries and your worship, your tears and your trust, your problems and your praise, your secrets and your submission. Give God your fear and your faith. Give it your all. Here's what Isaiah says, and I'm done. He says that the generous, or the heroes, are planted in generosity. And he says they stand firm and they stay faithful. And even though I've had to watch people who have positioned themselves as heroes take and take and take and take, God says, here's a solution. Here's the thing that transforms the world. When I can raise up a group of people who are committed to not being takers, but to being givers. You don't need a secret serum, and you don't need radiation. You don't need some horrible medical experience to happen for you to become a hero. You know what all you need to do to be a hero? Be generous. Those are the ones that, in the end, God is going to lift them and say, you helped me transform the world because you were willing to be a giver and not a taker. Let's pray. God, we thank you for this time. We thank you for your word. We thank you for this opportunity to set our hearts on the course towards one of the most generous acts we do as a church, and that is to give monetarily. But God, we know that for many of us, especially those who've been Christians for a long time, giving our money is not the issue. There's so many other things that we have been withholding that we need to give. And so, God, I'm praying right now, first, that if someone is under the sound of my voice in the room or on camera, that if they haven't given their whole life to you or their heart to you, that they would make that decision today. And then, God, for those of us who have given our hearts to you, that have claimed Jesus as our Lord and our Savior, but there's still stuff that we've been holding back, God, help us to not rest on the fact that we have no problem giving our money when there's other things that we have been not so generous with. And so, God, help us to give it to you, whatever it is that we've been holding back. And then help us to have the same patience that you have with us that we need to have with you. And then, God, help us to not do this thing halfway, but to give it our all in the same way that Jesus gave his entire life, not parts of it, but his entire life. So, God, now I'm praying that as we prepare to take Holy Communion, that you will remind us that you give. That is the ultimate expression of trust and love, that you trust that humanity has the same capacity that you have, which is to love unconditionally. And that's why you started it off by being generous with your life, trusting that your life was beautiful and compelling enough that we can also become people who live generously, who give of ourselves without reservation. And so I pray that you would help us to be mindful of this as we approach the table. God, we love you, we thank you, and we pray this in Jesus' name. So for those who are new, this is a time in our service where we do something that is important to us, where we take Holy Communion, where we celebrate the death and the resurrection of Jesus Christ. So the cup of juice and the bread represent his blood and his body. Here's what I want you to think about as you approach the table. There's two in the front, two in the back. As always, we have someone who's here to pray with you. But as you approach, I want you to think about how generous Jesus was. To not just give part of himself, but to give all of himself. As a way to say that he even trusts the principle of generosity. He gave himself, trusting that that act of generosity was so compelling and so beautiful that it would attract us to also be ones who would love unconditionally. So as the band comes, you can come as you feel led in the front or the back to take communion and be reminded of how generous Jesus was with his life and how he's calling us